Let me tell you about a sound that will stop your heart cold. It's not a gunshot and it's not a scream. It's the sound of a ferry pulling away and realizing you're on the wrong side of the water. That low, mournful, foghorn blast. It was the sound of my lifeline dissolving into the Atlantic mist. I was officially stranded. It was late October on the coast of Maine, and I was cycling the whole jagged shoreline, trying to find some kind of peace. I hit Vinyl Haven Island, and if you've ever been there, you know it's not a tourist trap. It's a lobster trap. It's carved from gray rock and ruled by lobstermen who look like they were born with a boat hook in one hand and a 50-year debt in the other. It's beautiful, sure, but it feels ancient and unforgiving that I'd managed to get a flat tire right as the last ferry, the Governor Curtis, was sounding its final call. By the time I patched it, the only thing left of the boat was a diminishing wake. I had missed it. I had no choice but to stay. The wind on Vinyl Haven doesn't just blow. It cuts. It's a relentless, salty wind that smells of diesel, damp wool, and brine. I knew I couldn't pitch my flimsy tent in the woods. I'd freeze. So, I walked the main dock until I found it. A rickety, abandoned-looking fishing shack at the farthest, darkest end of the pier. It was mostly falling apart, built out of warped, bleached wood, but it had 4 walls and a roof that mostly held the rain out. Heaven that I shoved my bike inside, spread out my sleeping bag on a pile of old, stiff rope, and tried to settle in. It was maybe 10:30 p.m. The silence out there was heavy. Not the desert silence I told you about, but a coastal silence, interrupted only by the creaking of the pilings in the tide and the occasional, distant buoy bell. I was bone-tired. I was almost asleep. And then, I heard the engine drone. It wasn't the steady rhythm of a regular trawler coming home. This was a low, sputtering growl, like the engine was old and struggling. I felt the vibration through the floorboards before I actually heard the boat clearly. I crept to the wall and peered through a knothole. Just a dime-sized crack in the wood. A beat-up fishing vessel, the Not Ready, was easing up to the dock, sluggishly, almost secretively. The name alone should have been my first warning. 3 figures materialized on the deck. The one at the helm, Big Mike, was a mountain of a man, draped in yellow oilskins, his face shadowed by a heavy wool cap. He moved with that slow, deliberate power of someone who knows he could snap you in half without trying. The second guy, Twitch, was the opposite. A ferret of a man, thin and jittery, his head swiveling constantly, like he expected the Coast Guard to drop from the night sky. The third was a mess. He was listing badly, hanging onto the cabin railing, singing this off-key, rambling tune about a mermaid who broke his heart. He was gone. Totally gone. Mike barked a command, his voice thick and rough, like he hadn't used it for a week. Twitch, grab the hook. Let's get this ashore before the tide pulls out. Twitch grabbed a thick rope, his hands shaking even as he secured the boat. Mike, man, why didn't we just use the truck? This ain't light. Cops patrol the road. Twitch. They don't patrol the deep end of the dock, Mike growled. Then, Mike disappeared into the boat's cabin, and when he reappeared, he was struggling under the weight of something enormous. A colossal, battered, aluminum cooler. It looked like the kind of specialized container they use to transport organs or highly sensitive equipment. This thing wasn't for beer. This thing was heavy. He finally wrestled it onto the damp dock with a sickening clang. Twitch was already sweating. Hurry, Mike. Let's stash the price of the catch and be done. Slow down, damn it, Mike hissed. We do this right. They started dragging the massive cooler toward the only available shelter, my shack. The dragging sound, metal scraping on wet wood, was horrific. I shrunk back, pulling my knees to my chest. They were 10 feet away, 5 feet. I could hear their breathing, the splashing of the tide under the pilings, and the drunk guys' muffled singing. I was holding my breath, praying they'd just leave the cooler outside. Then, the shack door was wrenched open, tearing the old latch with a loud azuri. The bare, dusty bulb inside the shack, the kind of weak light that only highlights dirt and despair, flickered on. And the first thing that light illuminated wasn't a stack of rope, but the shiny, neon green frame of my touring bicycle. Big Mike's shadow filled the doorway. He stopped dead. The whole dock went silent. save for the pathetic humming of the drunk man outside. Mike's voice dropped to a terrifying whisper. Well, 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 he said, slowly stepping over the threshold. Looky here. We got us a goddamn witness. I leaned back from the fire, wide-eyed. That's where we leave it for now. He's standing right over me. The cooler is sitting on the threshold. And the silence is the worst sound you've ever heard. I scrambled up, trying to look apologetic, not guilty. My heart was doing a frantic little jig against my ribs. I had to sell utter, complete, non-threatening incompetence immediately. Mike takes a step, and the floorboards groan in protest. His eyes, small and dark under the brim of his cap, were absolutely fixed on me. What in the hell are you doing here, son? He rumbled. That voice, man, it was like wet cement grinding. Twitch, who had followed him in, was darting glances between Mike, the cooler, and me. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Mike, look, he's just a kid. A damn cyclist. Tell him to scram. Man, we gotta put this away. Mike ignored Twitch. His attention never left me. You an official? You with the Coast Guard? You looking to cause trouble on my property? No, sir. Absolutely not. I stammered, pulling off my beanie and running a hand through my already messy hair, trying to look as harmless and panicked as possible. I'm nobody. Just a tourist. Cycling. I missed the last boat. I swear I didn't see anything. I pulled in here maybe an hour ago. I was asleep on that pile of rope. Promise. I gestured wildly toward my miserable sleeping spot. I had to make my story about my own misery, not about his crime. That was the only way out. Asleep, huh? Mike squinted, skeptical. But you heard us, Doc Kinda. I heard the engine, I admitted, trying to sound genuinely confused. I thought it was, I don't know, a diesel generator or something. I've been trying to tune out noise for days. Honestly, I didn't even realize you were bringing in a catch until the door opened. I'm just freezing, tired, and desperate for the mainland. I needed a dramatic prop. I pointed to the cooler. Look, if you need this spot for your catch, please take it. I'll pack up right now. I'll sleep out under the dock. I don't care. I just need to survive until the ferry at 6. Whatever you've got in that box, I don't want any part of it. I'm just trying to get to Canada, man. The drunk guy outside finally staggered into the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. He pointed a wobbly finger at the cooler. That's Salty's dowry, he slurred. Then he started laughing, a wheezing, disgusting sound. Mike, tell the little cyclist boy about Salty's dowry. Shut your hole, Skip, Mike snapped, not even turning his head. Skip was apparently the drunk one. That brief exchange confirmed everything I needed to know. Whatever was in the cooler was definitely illegal, definitely not lobster, and definitely something Mike did not want Skip talking about. Mike turned back to me, the moment of decision hanging in the frigid air. You look like a smart kid, he said, his voice dropping lower, almost a conspiratorial tone, which was somehow scarier than the shouting. But smart kids get curious. And curiosity around Vinyl Haven business? That can be expensive. He was testing me. He was trying to figure out if I was worth the trouble of whatever Big Mike did to expensive problems that I pushed back with the exhaustion defense. I looked him dead in the eye, pulling every ounce of sincerity and self-pity I could muster. Mike, I don't have a curious bone in my body right now. I'm running on maybe 4 hours of sleep total for the week. My legs are cramped. My knees are swollen. If you put $1 million on this floor, I wouldn't open my eyes for it. I just want off this island. I kept my hands visible, open, and slightly shaking. A perfect picture of a desperate, defeated idiot. Mike stared, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Twitch, who just shrugged, his eyes wide with fear. Then, Mike's granite face cracked. A slow, rusty smile spread across his lips. It wasn't a friendly smile, but it was a calculating one. All right, tourist, he said, reaching into the pocket of his oilskins, which was thick with brine and lint. He pulled out a crumpled, wet wad of currency. He carefully peeled off a pristine, stiff $100 bill. It smelled faintly of fish and expensive paper. He held it out. Here, this is for your silence. And for your memory. You spend this on the mainland. You spend it on a steak, a hot shower, and a bottle of good whiskey. You understand the rule, don't you? I took the bill. My fingers brushed his huge, calloused hand. The touch was like touching raw wood. Rule understood, Mike. I saw no boat, I saw no cooler, and I certainly didn't see Salty's dowry. I made sure to drop the last phrase in there, a little nod to Skip's drunk comment, proving I'd heard something, but wasn't going to press it. It was a gamble, but it showed I was a savvy witness, not a dense one. Someone who knew what was at stake and was willing to play the game. It worked. Mike just nodded slowly, satisfied. Good, he said. Now you lay down. And you don't move. Not a muscle. You start breathing through your mouth. Because you're going to hear some things and you don't want to know what they are. He gave me one last, hard stare that said, you break this agreement, and the Atlantic will be your grave. Then he turned his back, and he and Twitch hauled the massive cooler into the far corner of the shack. Skip, the drunk, followed them. Still humming his terrible tune, I slid down onto the rope, the cold returning instantly, and pulled my sleeping bag over my head. The $100 bill was clutched in my fist. I was alive, but the night was far from over. I could hear them working in the corner, and the heavy, muffled sound that came next was something I will never, ever forget. I let out a breath, looking slightly traumatized. I was buried in my sleeping bag, rigid. Big Mike had warned me, you're gonna hear some things, and I did. For the next hour, maybe more, it was a symphony of deeply unsettling sounds, all happening just 10 feet away, in the deep shadows of that shack. First, the heavy, metallic scrape of the cooler opening. I swear, the cold air that rushed out felt like it lowered the temperature of the entire room. Then, the murmuring. Mike and Twitch talking in hushed, low tones, their thick accents making their words almost impossible to parse. Something about the mainland drop and the schedule. Then, the worst sound of all, plastic. The sound of heavy-duty garbage bags being ripped open and shuffled, followed by a wet, slapping noise. It was organic, it was dense, and it was being moved from the cooler into the plastic bags. I didn't know if it was rare fish, black market ivory, or something far worse, but the sound of that wet thud was enough to twist my stomach into a knot. All the while, Skip, the drunk, was still murmuring and hiccuping, occasionally letting out a bizarre, mournful cry. Salty's going to be so cross. I focused on the $100 bill clenched in my hand. I focused on the creaking of the pilings outside. I focused on the idea of the sunrise. I turned myself into wood. I did not move. I did not breathe loud. I was just a pile of camping gear in the corner. Finally, after what felt like the longest century in human history, the noises stopped. The light bulb was flicked off. The door creaked open, then shut. I heard the dragging sound again, heavier this time, as they hauled the newly filled bags, now lighter, but less rigid, out onto the dock. Mike's final words before the engine started were a low warning directed at the shack. 6 a.m. sharp. Governor Curtis. Be on it. Then, the trawler engine roared, louder and stronger this time, and the Not Ready chugged away from the dock, its powerful diesel drone dissolving into the Atlantic night. Silence returned, but this time, it was an empty, blessed relief that I didn't move for another hour. When the eastern sky finally started to gray, the most beautiful, life-affirming color I have ever seen, I pushed my sleeping bag down. The shack was empty, save for my bike and my gear. The cooler was gone. But on the floor, where the cooler had sat, was a dark, damp stain. It looked like brine, but it smelled metallic. And next to the stain, scattered on the wood, were a few shimmering, translucent scales. Scales the size of quarters. Whatever they had been packing, it was massive, and it had been alive, recently. I didn't linger. I packed my meager gear in 3 minutes flat, shoved my bike out, and rode toward the ferry terminal. The sun broke over the water as I arrived. It was a crisp, clear morning. The air felt clean, washed by the incoming day. The few early morning commuters, mostly locals heading to the mainland for work, were lined up, sipping coffee. They were real people, talking about the weather and car problems. The night felt like a fever dream. I found a small, run-down cafe near the terminal. It was a cash-only place, smelling wonderfully of frying bacon and cheap coffee. The old woman behind the counter, Mrs. Higgins, had a kind, tired smile. I ordered everything hot: eggs, toast, and 2 cups of coffee. When it came time to pay, I smoothed out Mike's $100 bill. It was still damp, still smelled faintly of the sea. Mrs. Higgins looked at the bill, then at my travel-worn face, then at the bill again. She gave a small, knowing chuckle. "Well now," she said, her voice dry as aged wood. "Seems like you had a good night's fishin'. Didn't even get your hands wet, did ya?" She didn't wink. She didn't elaborate. But in that moment, I realized the whole town knew. Vinyl Haven was small enough that everyone understood the business that flowed through its docks after midnight. Mike hadn't just bribed a stranger. He'd paid a small tax to a town that understood the price of silence. The locals accepted the quiet protection racket, and Mrs. Higgins, by acknowledging the payment with a smile, was granting me safe passage. She handed me my change, $92 and a receipt. "Now you get on that boat, dear," she said, tapping the counter. "And you get yourself a fine steak dinner tonight. You look like you earned it." I walked onto the Governor Curtis ferry, bicycle in tow, feeling lighter than air. As the foghorn sounded, a sound of release this time, not doom, I looked back at the island. Big Mike, Twitch, and Skip were nowhere to be seen, but their catch was probably already speeding south on I-95. I took Mike's $100, and I didn't waste it. I bought the biggest, juiciest steak I could find on the mainland. I took the longest, hottest shower of my life, and I bought myself a brand new, high-quality bike lock. The real happy ending, though? It wasn't the steak or the shower. It was the feeling of sitting on that ferry, watching the island disappear into the distance, and realizing that I had stared a serious, life-threatening moment in the face, sold the hell out of my misery, and walked away with nothing but a good story, a full stomach, and the knowledge that sometimes being a desperate, harmless idiot is the best disguise you can ever have.